Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're joined by someone who in 1955 on the backlot of Paramount Studios played the infant Moses in Cecil B. DeMille's The Ten Commandments. Many people know this film as being bigger than life, starring Charlton Heston as the character of Moses. He joins us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today to share his life about his father and the film that's coming up on the missing Rockefeller. It's pretty interesting. We're going to find out more about that as he joins us here on the program today. Our guest, Fraser Heston. Fraser, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Hey, Daniel. Thanks a lot for having me.
Now, there are very few actors that I can think of, and I grew up, The Ten Commandments, a true story. I was in Texas, and I think it was just before the first grade. I was attending some sort of Bible school, And all of a sudden, the teacher gets us all out of class. We go marching through downtown, and we go to a movie house. And I thought, well, this is kind of interesting. And sure enough, this guy comes on the screen, and he says, for the next 3+ hours, you're going to be witnessing this. And I remember as a kid sitting there just mesmerized by what I was watching here. That must have been really something as you reflect on that, not knowing that you would actually remember that at the time that you were in the film.
Yeah, I was only 3 months old at the time, but obviously it was a huge event movie. I think at the time it was one of the most expensive movies ever made. And, even to this day, it has some of the best special effects ever created on film, I think. DeMille was a master filmmaker, practically invented the film business as we know it, and I think Dad felt he was really, really lucky to get that part.
It's interesting because I also got to enjoy the Universal Studios ride where the Red Sea parts.
Oh, yeah.
So, but what's interesting also about Charlton Heston is he really played in some fringe movies that you just weren't seeing anybody else do. We're talking Planet of the Apes, Soylent Green, Omega Man, things like that. What was his philosophy when it came to films? Did he just accept, or did he want to do things like that? What was going on with him as he shared any of this with you?
He wanted to do challenging parts. After he did Ten Commandments, he went off and did Touch of Evil with Orson Welles and was kind of instrumental in getting Orson the job directing that film as well as co-starring with him. And, I think his job as an actor was to find challenging roles that would not only challenge him but give him a chance to kind of spread his wings and really, sink his teeth into the meat of it, as it were. And he didn't really care if they were big budget pictures or more modest movies.
Now, growing up, a lot of times you'll hear stories of children who grow up in Hollywood actually in the business, and sometimes they don't turn out so well. What was that like for you growing up? How did your father, Charlton, actually deal with things like that?
Well, I got to say, I not only had a wonderful dad, but I kind of won the parent lottery altogether. My mom, Lydia, who, by the way, is 93 years old and still going strong, she's a wonderful person, and she was a great mother. And Dad was a great father. They dragged us kids, my sister Holly and I, all over the world. We grew up on movie sets and in Spain and Egypt and Greece and Rome and England and Mexico and Peru and all these amazing locations that they went to. But we also got to live there and work there and see a little bit about how the world works. We didn't go as tourists. We went as people who were, coming for 3, 4, 5, 6 months, learned the language, things like that. So that was a great way to grow up.
Yeah, I can imagine it was, since you actually said they dragged you to these countries.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah, it must have felt like that after a while.
Yeah, well, we used to call it ruin running. Mom would take us to the top of the Great Pyramid, or Dad would drag us through the Roman Forum with a lecture on Roman history. But of course, all that stuck with me, and maybe that's why I became a sort of a filmmaker and storyteller to this day.
Mm-hmm. I know one of the biggest things too, and it's sometimes especially in regards to what happened in Orlando, that your father, especially toward the end of his life, was most known for being a representative, if not the main speaker, for the National Rifle Association. How was that in your family? What really was his point of view when it came to the Second Amendment?
Well, I think you have to go back a little bit in time and look at his work with Dr. Martin Luther King, for example, in civil rights. And, he accompanied the arts contingent. He led the arts contingent to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. There's a famous picture of him talking to Harry Belafonte and Burt Lancaster on that marvelous day when Dr. King gave his I Have a Dream speech. Dad believed that you need to be active in the support of your country. And a lot of people have forgotten he was also president of his union. He was a strong union man. You know, you don't think of a guy like my dad as necessarily being a union guy, but he was, and he believed in the rights of the rank and file. So he worked very, very hard for those kinds of things. And I think he saw his commitment to the Second Amendment, more as a stance, a moral stance, rather than a political stance. And he certainly wasn't a gun nut. That was not his thing at all. He was a deep file. There was a lot more to him than people realize.
You know, and I agree with that because I remember in the Michael Moore documentary, Bowling for Columbine, they kind of, to me, seemed to be shedding a dark light on Charlton Heston when it came to gun control. And I was thinking to myself, well, I think if you really look beneath the surface of this, he believes, as you were saying, in fighting for your country and for your liberties, your rights. And you can see that theme in his movies a lot of times. Isn't that true?
Sure, I think so. I mean, he often had a kind of heroic theme of a good man fighting for his country or his king or his president or whatever for freedom, mostly. I think if you look at films like Ten Commandments and Ben-Hur, there's a strong thread of that individual liberty and freedom that runs through those, and obviously he believed in that. I once told him anybody that fights in World War II, he served in the Pacific Theater in B-25s. And I said, anybody that fights in World War II should have a get out of public service free card for life. But he didn't believe that.
I guess he wouldn't.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that you actually directed your father in several films. Is that true?
I did, yeah. We became not only good friends in my adult life, but business partners. And we produced and directed, or I got to direct him, rather, in several movies. Treasure Island was a wonderful opportunity for us to work for Ted Turner with young Christian Bale, who was then about 17 years old. And we did several other films, Crucifer of Blood, and most recently in the 90s I directed him in Alaska, which was kind of a family adventure film we made together.
Now, what are some of the fondest memories that you have in working with your father and growing up besides traveling around the world?
Well, I think both growing up on movie sets, I mean, being taken at 5 in the morning to a set, and he would kind of turn me over to the stuntmen or the horse wranglers, and they kind of had their own, tough love. They were good guys to grow up with. They're good people. And I think I learned a lot about the way the world works on those movie sets. And then, as I said, as an adult, being able to, as a filmmaker, to work with my dad was fantastic. I mean, we had creative disagreements, but we always resolved them amicably, and I think the picture would always be better for it. We never had a rough patch, as some people do. We've always been, good friends, and I think when we started working together, it really was, frankly, one of the highlights of my life.
And I can see the influence of the relationship that you had with your father that carried over into you being a father and, Father's Day coming up. I understand that you and your son actually work together as well. Yeah,
Jack Heston is getting ready to make his third feature film. He's produced 2 already. He's only 24. Graduate of USC Film School, like so many wonderful filmmakers here in L.A., and he's a really good kid. I'm very, very lucky not only to have had a great father, but I have a wonderful son, too.
Well, and not only that, but, working together as a family rather than, Dad going out to work, that sort of a thing. That just hasn't really happened too much, has it?
No, it's nice to keep the family business going. And, one of the things that Jack does for me is he keeps me a little more clued in about the new media and the Internet. And Jack's already working with YouTube stars on certain films and looking for streaming outlets and new ways to think outside the box. And I think that's the future of the film business.
Now, when it comes to the Ten Commandments, I guess an interesting question would be about your father. What was his religious perspective?
Well, Dad was a committed Christian. He definitely believed that, the Ten Commandments was an important story that needed to be told, just as he did with Ben-Hur, for example, which is, after all, a fictional story. Ben-Hur is a fictional character set against the historically accurate backdrop of the Roman Empire at the time of Christ. And indeed, the subtitle of Ben-Hur is A Tale of the Christ. So I think that legitimately he was able to, kind of explore his religious feelings, which I think, deepened and developed throughout his career as he was able to explore these characters in these wonderful films. So some of them historical and some characters, as I say, fictional, but all of them having some resonance, I think, with his faith and I think also with, his ideas about freedom.
I know it was really interesting. One of the movies that got me back into enjoying Westerns again. I used to be one of those kids, Saturday morning you watched your cartoons and you knew the day was done when Westerns started showing up on television and the cartoons were over with. But and that was in the 1990s film Tombstone. And I was really surprised. I'm like, wow, that's Charlton Heston, isn't it? I hadn't seen him in years in anything there. But how long did his career actually span?
Well, his career spanned directors from Cecil B. DeMille to James Cameron. He was in True Lies, directed by James Cameron. So that gives you an idea of the roughly 50-year span. He was making films right up into the late 1990s. And as I said, he, didn't mind doing a supporting role. He knew that as you get older, the leading roles are a little farther and fewer between, and so he was happy to be an actor. He started out on the stage, and he had that kind of actor's ethos about there are no small parts, only small actors.
I agree with that. Sometimes it's the supporting actors that make the film great in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Those are the ones you remember.
Now, you're involved in quite a few projects, and I understand the newest one you have is the search for Michael Rockefeller. Tell us about that.
Well, we discovered a cache of lost film footage that was taken by a journalist named Milt Macklin, who went to New Guinea in the late 60s looking for Michael Rockefeller. Michael, as you know, who was the son of Governor Nelson Rockefeller, later Vice President of the United States. He disappeared, Michael did, in New Guinea in 1961. His canoe turned over. He was exploring and buying primitive artwork for a museum in New York. And he was with a companion, and after the canoe turned over, they stuck to it for a day and a night, and he decided to swim for shore with the famous last words, "I think I can make it," and was never seen again. Or was he? And that began a whole series of mysterious occurrences and sightings that Michael may have been seen alive on an island somewhere. And roughly that's what became the instigation for Mr. Macklin to take his cameras and go to New Guinea. Fortunately, he never did anything with that film footage. I found it and realized it would make a marvelous documentary, which you can now see on Netflix or on DVD.
Mm-hmm. Sounds pretty intriguing. And I'm looking on your website now on Agamemnon Films, and you've got quite a few things here in the can. Considering that it spans more than 30 years, that's a long time in the business. It must be interesting to see how that business has evolved since you started.
My wife wonders when I'm getting ready to retire, but I'm not quite there yet. The business has evolved. I mean, look at the film I just told you about that's on Netflix. That's my first film that's available, digitally streaming, which even 5 years ago would kind of been unheard of. So the new media and the new outlets that are provided, I think, are a great thing for filmmakers and give you a lot of opportunity, basically, to make films that are maybe a little different from the traditional kinds of distribution outlets.
Now, you also, a film I was really surprised, I didn't know that you had actually directed this, was Needful Things from Stephen King. Wow. Great stuff.
Well, I had a great time with Max von Sydow, Ed Harris, Bonnie Bedelia. We had a wonderful cast. And, of course, Stephen King is just this magnificent writer. I think he's one of the finest writers in America today. And a really good guy, too, by the way. And having a chance to direct that for my friends at Castle Rock was kind of a dream, to tell you the truth.
I can imagine. I remember watching Stephen King when Craig Ferguson still had his late night talk show, and it was funny. He was on the show, and and they were talking about writing, and the joke that I thought was pretty funny was when Craig Ferguson says, "No, you actually write books, really good stories and novels." And they were, I guess, talking about the book 50 Shades of Grey. And he was, 50 Shades of Grey, that's not a book, that's porn for illiterates.
Well, I'm not going to go that far, but I got to say I do.
Well, that was Craig's joke.
Yeah, that was a good joke.
So now, how do you see yourself now? Are you and your son going to be working close together from this point forward, depending on how long he decides to stay in the business?
I hope so. He's doing his own films as well, and I don't guide his career at all. Mm-hmm. He's got plenty of experience now and a really great education in film, so I kind of look to him for advice in many areas, and if we can put a picture together in the next year or two, I think that would be a really great opportunity for both of us. So that's what we're both hoping to do, I think.
Now, what, if any, do you find, are you hoping to carry forward a legacy of your father in some way through your career, or were you encouraged to be independent?
Well, I think, my dad's legacy speaks for itself. He doesn't need any help from me. I think it is an important legacy, and I do want people to know about it, and having an opportunity to talk to people such as yourself on the radio is one of the great things about this country. And I do want to be able to carry that legacy forward, but obviously I have my own artistic and business agendas, and I think so far I've been able to follow them pretty well. And basically look forward to more challenging and more interesting projects in the future.
Yeah, I can't see too many legacies that can be taught by a guy who can throw down a stick, have it turn into a snake, and eat two other snakes.
Yeah, there you go.
Now,
go a little help from Mr. DeMille.
Now, for our listeners, so they can discover more, why don't you go ahead and give out your website where they can find out more?
Well, you can go to Agamemnon.com. That's AGAMEM, like mother, NON, like Nancy.com. And that has all our films and our projects in the works on it, and a lot of other fun stuff on my dad and things like that. So have a look, or just Google me, and it'll come up eventually.
Well, very good. Well, Fraser, I'd like to thank you for joining us here on the program today and sharing the legacy of your father, as well as the work that you've been doing out there as well. It's been a pleasure to have you on the program.
Daniel, thanks a lot. It's been an honor.
You bet. We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for joining us. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-news updates, and that way you can stay up to date on what's going on in Beyond 50, as well as what's coming up on the program. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for joining us. This is the Beyond 50 radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.